everybody. Welcome to this lovely, intimate MEFA Matters times Clear Channel. So two things. So thank you for Clear Channel for having us. Clear Channel, one of the Media for All sponsors, partners, friends, people who get involved who want to make a real disproportionate impact to our mission and what we're trying to do. And I think if it wasn't for partners like Clear Channel, then and a team here, it would be hard for us to make our mission a success. So thank you for having us in your lovely office. It's normally really hot down here, but today it's quite a nice temperature, so that's good. So I think most people here are friendly faces who we've seen before, but for those of you that haven't been involved with Media for All before, we were set up in 2017, was it, Naren? By Naren, I don't know if I say his name twice, and I think I should just get you to tell the story, but I think back then Naren looked around at an industry do that he went to one year, and he looked around and he thought, well, there aren't many people that look like me, there aren't many people who seem like they come from where I come from, and I think sadly maybe it's got better, but it's not getting better quick enough, and there's still a lot of work to do. So I think we're getting to the time of year where we're all going to be thrust into various celebration events and things out and about, and I think we still see that we've got a bit of a runway to go at if we want to complete our mission, but equally I think we all know it's never going to stop. There's always going to be stuff to do, unfortunately, but that is what we're here for. We originally, this was planned for during Black History Month, so I had a bit of a rewrite of our intro, and I think it would be probably, whatever your politics, remiss of us not to talk about Rishi a little bit. And I think look, full disclosure, I'm definitely not conservative. Not that there's anything wrong with it. If I was, I've been pulled up on my political ranting before. But I guess I think we should be proud, and I think we should feel positive about him becoming Prime Minister, because it's the first person that's not been someone from a white background who's been in that highest position of power and office in the United Kingdom. And I think whatever we think about the uphill battle we've got to go on as a country in terms of cost of living, in terms of people not being able to heat their homes, in terms of an equitable society, which we're getting further away from. I think the fact that there is somebody there that other people can look up and go, well, they've made it, they're demonstrating that it's possible. I think that's something that we won't quite applaudatory, but I think we should at least feel quite positive about that. So I think that's a good move in the right direction. We will talk about on our Media for All, I know a lot of you on our Media for All WhatsApp group, and I think for the first time in a long, Nikki's going, what's he going to say? For the first time in a long time, it was on fire. No, not in a long time, but in terms of the depth of thinking and chats and conversations and what people were talking about, it was one of those moments that I've never seen the like of it in terms of I mean, if I sat and tried to read it all, I'd be reading it for the whole day. There was so much good stuff on there, and I just learnt a hell of a lot. And I think that's what things like Media for All as a platform is. That's what today's about. It's about learning. It's about understanding. And, you know, I've said time and time again, I definitely don't always get it right. But understanding issues, understanding how to talk about and being able to face into, being able to ask those difficult questions, I think is, again, what we try to do, bring people together. Right, the first song, people, shall we? No, we better not. We'll make them feel really guilty. Hello, coming in. You just missed the boring bit of me doing an introduction. That's you're probably better off. So yeah, I guess again, that's what our community is about. So if you're not on the WhatsApp, if you're not part of Media for All yet, definitely hit us up. Have a look at our website. Have a look at our socials. It's really easy to get involved, and there's loads of interesting debates and things you can get involved with. But why we're here today? That's my boring rant over. I guess we're here to talk about inclusive planning, and I guess moreover, I guess it's about how we drive that conversation of inclusivity in the work that we do, right? And advertise loads of posters around this room. There's loads, you know, we all come here every day to think about how we help our clients sell more and do more. I think one of the things we're going to talk about today is how we do that through a bit more of an inclusive lens. And again, you know, it's something that gets talked about quite a lot around Black History Month. It gets talked about quite a lot around Diwali, and it's like, oh yeah, this brand's done well, they put it in their ad, 100 points. And I think it's, how do we make it more of this is how we do things, this is how it is. We don't have to have a line on our plan, it's just on our plan because we're trying to reach those audiences. And we're going to get into, I feel like I've really got my back to you. We're going to get into that today. But we've got a brilliant panel. So can I call you Bedders? I don't know. Yeah. Bedders. Everyone's Bedders something, aren't they, in outdoor? But if I can ask the brilliant panel to introduce themselves. I realise I didn't introduce myself, but hey ho, go.
Thanks for coming, guys. As Liam said, hopefully an inspiring and interesting session. My name's Steve Bedwell. I'm head of sales here at Clear Channel UK. So a big warm welcome, and I hope you enjoy.
Okay, I'm Jessola, and I am Jessola Omibi, if you want my full name. I work at OMG Unite as a planning and buying manager.
Hello, everybody. I'm Satin Reed. I'm Managing Director of Media Comms. Very excited to be here today because I think this is a super important subject. So it's great that we're putting it out there and having a conversation about it.
And I'm Azad Ali. I'm the Head of Performance Insights at Spark Foundry, and I'm also very excited to be here.
Oh, thank you. So welcome to our panellists. I don't think we'll end up going anywhere that's like super deep or dark today, but in case we do, we've partnered with NAB. So if anyone is in any way, shape triggered or wants to reach out or said, I've recognised that and I didn't know how to deal with it, NABs are great at helping out with some of that stuff. So again, their website has got all of the contact details on it. As I say, sometimes we get into tough conversations, but maybe, I don't think we will today. Questions, I like that. They hate it when I do this paper thing near the microphone. So let's start off. So we've said today's about inclusive planning. Tell us, Steve, what is it? Why is it important? Like, what does it mean to you?
Well, purely from an out-of-home lens, we've got some esteemed panellists who can broaden out from this. But I think, personally speaking, from a Clear Channel point of view, first and foremost, we see out-of-home front and centre when it comes to inclusivity and ethnicity, because we are at the heart of those local communities that potentially are hardest to reach. It's above the line, and we think there's a really important role to play. And we've seen that right through the pandemic in particular. Because of that, we are operating, as I said, in communities. So we operate as an advertising business, but a large swathe, if not the vast majority of what we do, is about public infrastructure. So things like bus shelters and giving back therein to local communities. So there's a really important role to play there, and an intersection between advertising and community. And because of that, we underpin what we do with our agencies, our specialists, with an approach that is two-pronged across platform for brands and platform for good, and this absolutely sits at the heart of the latter. And the last part of that for us is and hopefully we can talk about this at length in many meetings to come, because as you said earlier, the job's not done yet, and we've got an important role to play. And the inclusive channel, or out of home, the inclusive channel, is something that we've worked on, being a labour of love for the last few years, but it also had an insight thread and some shocking stats. And one in particular is that 41% of those that we surveyed didn't feel in any way, shape or form represented or seen by the advertising that they saw on the streets. And that's obviously a representation piece. But of course, when it comes to ethnicity, which is the piece we're talking about today, commercially, that's a group that are worth, after the last census or the last time, which is only going to go one way, £300 billion in the UK market. So, it's not just a case of needing to act, it's a case of acting now, and if not, losing out.
Brilliant. I'd like the platform for good and platform for brands, and I guess the intersection of those two things is where brands and communities do well, right? Gisela, tell us about what it means for you, what it means at Unite, and how you think about it when you're planning.
Yeah, so I work at OMG Unite, and this is a specialist team within Omnicom Media Group, and we focus on multicultural planning. So we focus on diverse communities such as LGBTQ+, South Asian, Black, and it's kind of looking at some of those. What we find is, like, for example, when you look at barb measurement or radar and things like that, they don't often cover some of these smaller community titles. So when we do look into mainstream planning, you find that a lot of the time these community titles are overlooked. And with that, it means you're missing a part of your audience, because they might not necessarily be engaging with mainstream media the way you want them to. They might have small touch points, and some people don't engage with it at all. So with that, our team, we kind of say we want to move brands from unconscious exclusion to conscious inclusion. And that's like, when you get your plan, interrogate it, look at it and think, okay, so this is our audience. How can we apply that to other ethnicities? How can we apply that to other communities? How does what product we're trying to sell fit within these groups? Is it relevant? Is it something they use? I think it's kind of just making sure you kind of cover your blind spots, that you're actually thinking, okay, we know what TGI is telling us, but what is happening outside of TGI is a sample that can exclude some of these communities as well. So I think that's kind of what it means to me. I'm hoping that kind of makes sense. But yeah.
No, it totally does. I like the concept of unconscious exclusion because I think a lot of the decisions we make aren't made purposely or with bad intent. Some of those decisions, I'm sure they are, but I guess what you're trying to do is shine a light on the fact that, you know, you've got your press plan, but you're not really thinking about some of those audiences. Can I ask you one more question? I find it really interesting. I guess some of the partners that you might be working with, are they always set up to understand, understand might be the wrong word, but they might be creating the best magazine out there that's possible, but they might have never heard of TGI, or they might be creating the greatest TV show, but they've never sold to an agency, or do you support and help those teams with that?
So we do try our best. I think it's also like an element of, with being on Rage, there's a cost, and it's like whether they can also afford to be on those platforms. So sometimes it's us kind of bigging them up to the client a little bit and saying, okay, we know that X, Y, Z, but we see that actually they do have a reach within the community, and this can help you extend the reach of your campaign. So I think it's kind of looking at it from that point of view as well.
So you kind of be their salesperson for them.
Yeah.
And Satin, it'd be good to understand, and I know that WPP are doing a huge amount in this space, and they've open sourced a lot of it to the industry, which is awesome because, again, smaller agencies, other agencies can learn from each other. Whose responsibility is it? Is it the client's got to ask that question? Is it the agency's absolutely there to recommend and tell? Is it the client? Do you know what I mean? How do you think about that?
I think it's our responsibility, right, to make every client's investment work as hard as it can and drive growth. And you're negligent if you then aren't thinking about an audience in its totality and really understanding where the growth comes from. So it absolutely is our responsibility. And I think within an agency, it has to be the responsibility of the leadership, right? Because it's one of those things that when you've got your day job, it's quite easy to muddle along thinking you're doing a great job and not think about inclusivity in the way that you plan. Because frankly, we're not set up for it very well in the industry, as you've just very well articulated. So it's quite easy to kind of brush it under the carpet. So you've got to set yourself that agenda as a senior leadership team to make sure that you make it as important and as easy for your teams to be able to execute their media in that way and think about media in a different way. There's obviously a lot of responsibility on our clients as well to do that. I think again, it's the seniority bit, because I think we often find we have conversations, perhaps at a brand manager level or marketing manager, and then are they able to then sell that idea further up the organisation and really get buy-in? I think that can often be quite challenging. So both sides, very senior, have got to really set out the stall, I think.
I think that's true. One of the carbon calculator, I think did you also create that? I'm like, another MediaCom thing. Brilliant.
What can I say?
The carbon calculator is a really interesting thing. We're like, there's, cross industry team worked that together. MediaCom made this thing, put it out there, and it's great, right? You can run your media plan through it and can tell you how many trees you've cut down to make your plan. I'm sure you'll have a view on that from the outdoor industry, by the way, Steve. But it's the easiest thing in the world. We say, right, team, we're going to stick that on every plan now and talk to our clients about. Do you think that's happened? It hasn't. So, and how many times are we asking our people are using it? So you're right. You definitely need that. This is the vision. This is why we're going to do it. This is purposeful intent. Or I'm sure you didn't say that, but that sort of thing is how we do it. Azad, tell me a little bit about from a inclusivity perspective and your role. So digital is either the most brilliant place in the world because you could be hyper-targeted, you can reach our people, or it's the wild, wild west and don't touch it, be really careful. Tell us a bit about how inclusive planning comes across your desk and how you think about it over at your place.
Yeah, so firstly, I guess I'll just touch very quickly on a point that Gisela made about conscious inclusion, which is, I think, a really, really important term, and it's exactly a terminology that I've been using at Spark and Publicis as well, so great minds think alike, I guess. But the reason why it's important is because brands and us as agencies will always have an ideal target in mind, and that will come with its biases, and unless you're course correcting by consciously inclusion, you're naturally going to miss out an element of your target audience that your potential customers that you're not targeting specifically. So it is a way of us course correcting. Going back to your question, for us, particularly for myself, coming from a programmatic background, we had a lot of instances, I would say, in the inception of programmatic, whereby brand safety was a big thing, and whether it be clients just being super, super cautious, or whether it be people just finding something and putting it on Twitter, and the clients just like going, please avoid this for me. And so brand safety become a key part of us just literally blocking everything and anything that is deemed remotely kind of controversial. And so we've come a long way from what metrics and tools we had in that place, which is very much just block a bunch of keywords, just block a bunch of categories, and that's fine. We won't ever be in any trouble. Nowadays, we've got a lot more tools that allow us to be a lot more sophisticated with the way that we can target. And so what it's enabled us to do, and me coming from that place of, I know we said we wouldn't get to too much dark territory, but just to kind of give a bit of context from my own side. So when certain instances happen in the news, I was kind of finding myself blocking myself, and I'm sure you can kind of understand what that means. But at the time, it was just like, yep, fine, I'll do it. It's my job. And it's only when you kind of take a step back that you realize, wow, that's quite deep. That's really, it shouldn't really be like that. And so what I've kind of done from that is kind of spearheaded a bit of a inclusive media buying option within Spark and Publicist. So in one hand, similar to what Gisela's doing at her place is partnering with more publishers that have access to underrepresented communities, but on the other side, it's working closely with our current partners and kind of putting the onus on them to only give us inventory that is adherent to certain inclusive values that we've set out. And so by doing that, it just means that we're making sure we're targeting the whole holistic community in a conscious way and in a subconscious way as well.
And thank you for sharing that. And that must have been awful to have those specific moments where you have to exclude yourself. You're like, well, what? You don't want to target people like me. That'd be horrible. So, apologies you had to go through it. Some of the, there's an awful thing around drill music this week, and I should know the chap's name, the guy that got shot. And drill music has a really bad reputation. And again, it's difficult to get into a huge debate in the time we've got, but I think you find clients saying, I want to exclude some of those. And we work with a lot of record labels. I'm sure some of you will work with others. And it's like, actually, they're creating art. They need to get it out to audiences. If we start to exclude that, what does that say to that community? That community is massively represented by one group. So I guess it's really difficult to navigate. But how, without answering that specific question, Azad, it'd be interesting to know how you do start to build out that way of reaching the right people for the right time.
I guess to an extent, you can still avoid that type of content with just your standard kind of brand safety targeting. Like if you're avoiding violence, whatever, you don't need to then also put in drill into your keyword list. Like you're always going to be avoiding that type of content. And so, as you said, when we're thinking too much about what we want to avoid, we can very much lose sight of what we're actually targeting and how we can be more inclusive in our targeting. So it's literally just about having honest conversation with our clients, also with our leadership team internally, and just be like, we are confident that we are going to avoid anything that we absolutely don't need to be, but let us be open with how we're also able to target the entirety of our community as well.
Thank you. Betters, in terms of that inclusive planning piece and outdoor, I remember, I've never been lucky enough to work on Apple, but they were notorious to have this, we were only going to go in these places, we're only going to go in those spaces, and without talking explicitly to Apple. I wonder what that means for where you build sites, what that means to where you invest, because where you're, do you call it plant? Where you're building out plant, I guess it's really interesting and positive that money is going towards those communities, to spaces, to whatever. But how do you make sure you're going to build them in the right places? Because I'd imagine some advertisers going, well, I want my placements to be here and here.
Mm-hmm.
Understand?
Yeah,
might be a badly worded question.
No, not at all. I'm saying it's not necessarily the area of specialism for me, but Clear Channel in particular. I think you look at the competition out there, and one thing that we do talk about is how we're not particularly London centric, and I think when we're talking about something like inclusivity, that's actually a massive strength. So we work with those local councils, communities, public landlords, private landlords or public, and ultimately we want to have the right portfolio across the UK to represent those groups within. And I think to sort of work not necessarily in contradiction, but in complement what Asad's just said, that's the point, I think, with Out of Home, in that we are across these communities and we can overtly speak to not just those people within that might be harder to reach with, keywords or publications that they might not even read or view on a broadcast level, that truly one-to-many medium that can reach those smaller minority communities. I think is important, and therefore, with the plan, to your question, we make sure, hopefully, that we can work with our product team to make sure the distribution is equal across the UK, and then we're able to dip into new forms of data to say what that looks like from a clear channel audience point of view.
All right. No, that's really interesting because I guess making sure that space is going in places where we can go and reach different people, different audiences is important. Gisela, on Unite, this is a personal question. So how you work with clients? It's not a personal question. I'm interested. Everyone's like, yeah, no, especially Nikki, strike three. When you work with clients, do you work with them in addition to another agency or another client team, or how do you get brought in?
Yeah, so usually, obviously, we're part of Omnicom Media Group, so we would work with the sister agencies within the business. So
don't want to partner with 7 Stars. Have a better no, not yet. Oh, we're always looking for good talent. So no, but I guess that makes sense if you're working with I don't know, at Manning, or if you're working with they'll go, actually this brief could be really interesting.
Yeah.
I guess hopefully they'll bring you in on more things.
Yeah.
Than not. Okay, thank you. That's helpful for me anyway. And Satin, when we think about sort of if we start moving on to role of brands, role of CMOs, it's the advertiser money that's driving all of this at the end of the day. Brands can be a bit scared to get caught out, or brands there are some brands, not any of ours, but some brands can do it I'm sure there's totally loads of ours that do it on a bit more of a superficial level. How can they make sure they do it with authenticity?
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. It's like, why do so many white middle class men connect with advertising? Because it's all made by white middle class men, right? It's like, I get it. And I think so. The authenticity thing, I think, probably starts and ends with you need to have teams that are more representative at the start, right? And people that have lived experience, people that understand those communities. If you can't get access to that, if you don't have that infrastructure in your building, then I think the way that we get closer to authenticity is to work with partners that do. So we have a thing at MediaCom, which we call cultural consultants, which is really a network of businesses, media owners for the most part, that are, building, publishing for different communities, whichever they might be. And let's use that knowledge and that understanding and that power within those communities, rather than trying to build something out of a team that really doesn't understand where that community is going or what it needs. So that's really, I think, you've just got to get as close to the understanding of that community as you can, in the same way that you should with any audience, right? But we've become quite lazy, I think, especially amongst minority groups. So we really build those partnerships so we can have, our clients, our brands can build those really decent conversations with consumers.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut across, Saturn. I was building on what you just said. Do you find that more often it's the agency and it's the media teams that are calling that out for brands? And the reason I asked that question isn't specific to MediaCom. It's quite often I think creative agencies are slower than media agencies to adapt to this. I don't know if you've got a view on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's not easy, right? We've got a very big agency, and we've got a good number of people in the agency that come from different backgrounds, different groups, but they're not easy conversations to have, right? So yes, we are calling it out more. We are having those conversations, and I think media agencies, again, because of their proximity to the consumer, are better at doing that than perhaps agencies, which creative agencies are often more brand out than they are consumer out. I think would be fair to say. I hope so. No creative people in the room who will disagree with me. So I think that makes a difference.
No, good, it's all your fault.
I think it makes things we're closer to consumers. We're closer to the publishers and the media owners that talk to those consumers. So yeah.
I think that makes sense. I think if we are the voice of that consumer, then we have legitimacy to drive some of those conversations and help the creative agency. I think there's, people remember Christmas past. There's people calling out advertisers to say, oh, they've got a mixed race child, or they've got X or they've got Y, and they go, job done, tick, and that's great. And I think that's when it doesn't feel authentic. That's when it. Yeah. But then you find yourself going, well, actually, why isn't that authentic? And I wonder how you start to navigate some of those conversations.
Well, the authenticity is like, about how you, if we're talking to, especially to marginalised communities, you're talking to marginalised, they've been marginalised in everything, right? And then you can't, they've been marginalised in media and been marginalised in the world of advertising. then you have to work doubly hard in order to build trust and build connection with that different audience, right? So you cannot just go and put an ad out, once a year or brand something. You've got to have that relationship, that understanding, which starts with that deeper connection and understanding right at the beginning. And just to go back to another question you just asked us a minute ago, which is, do we instigate the conversation? So we've started. We're not 100% there, but we've started to say that every single plan needs to have the inclusivity lens, because there isn't really one media plan that goes out the building that doesn't require that, right? I mean, I can't think of one campaign, one brand, whatever, that doesn't need to have an inclusive view. So we're trying to do it as a sort of opt-out more than it is an opt-in, which again, it's difficult to scale it over the clients and the number of people we have, but I think that's the sort of approach. So we are always trying to instigate those conversations.
And what do you think the biggest blocker is that stops that from happening?
Time, because we are building new skills and new muscles in people that perhaps haven't got lived experience and don't have those conversations and don't feel comfortable, because it can be really awkward, right? There are awkward conversations to have if you don't have that lived experience, or there are clients that don't feel comfortable. So I think the biggest blocker is the fear of saying something wrong or doing something wrong. And we've seen horrendous examples of that, haven't we? All over the place. And Pepsi, God, whoever let that go out, but so it goes wrong. So I think it becomes easier to not do something than it does to do something, which is obviously the wrong thing completely. I'd rather people make mistakes than not do anything.
Yeah, it's hard. It's building that fast failure and that, encouraging that so that it becomes less of a blocker, and then it is time, right? So post-COVID, people have less talent. There are less people there physically. There are, in some cases, less people there physically do the job that they were once doing. But we are, it's not you, we are asking them to stop, think differently about this plan, who's the audience, where to reach, how to do it differently. And, again, the reason I'm asking is partly selfishly, because I know we're struggling to push our people to get to a place where every plan has that lens. I don't think we're at 10% of that lens, and there is a long way to go. And I guess it's maybe if you can remove that fear by demonstrating what good looks like, maybe that's part of it. I don't know. We get our heads together. Just as I've got a question for you. So I think you talked about Satin about doing it with authenticity, and I think there is like International Women's Day or whatever event it might be, and the brand goes, or Pride. We'll change our brand logo to the rainbow. We'll have the pink, whatever it might be. And I love the way in digital. I know social's not your wheelhouse; it's more programmatic, but it's so easy for brands to get called out. There's bots now that I find it quite amusing. Bots that set up and go, yeah, you're celebrating this, but less than 0.2% of your women are on the board, and all of that sort of stuff. So how in digital do we move it beyond sort of a badging exercise? How do we make it a bit deeper than that in a space where it's so easy to be caught out?
It's a tricky one, and I think it depends on where the client is and also where you are as an agency. And so I'll try not to contradict myself too much in my answer. So there's an element of just doing the work within the agency, like whether it be trying to put in initiatives that improve your representation, whether it be investment, whatever it is, just make sure you're making strides to try to help where you as a brand are. And once you've started to make that change, I think it becomes that much easier. What I think is a bad idea, and I think you touched on this, is you've got to start somewhere. So just because you don't feel like you're in a perfect position right now, it doesn't mean that you should just completely ignore everything and stay as is, as long as you're kind of making that effort. And I think that's what we as agencies should be trying to encourage, is a little bit of a backlash of a few people that are just trying to make a point for the case of making a point. Like, that's okay, as long as you have the will to kind of get past it and you're demonstrating that you are trying to make change. Like, I think that's what everyone really wants to see.
And building on that, we know that media can be such a positive influence in people's lives if it can be reflective of them. And I think in outdoor, more than ever, I remember when we had to relaunch Iceland and they were known for Kerry Katona and eating kangaroo parts, and I'm a celeb, and we're like, look, you've absolutely got to make it a bit about outdoor, haven't we? You've absolutely got to get it on outdoor, you've got to get on posters, you've got to use a shoot, you've got to have confidence, you've got to demonstrate that if I'm going to put a big, beautiful picture of I forget what it was we used, a shattered veranda, whatever it was, people believe in that product because it's on a huge 96 sheet, and that carries with it. And we've just done for Pride of Britain and TSB, we did a huge, I'm not sure where it is, someone who's from Connecticut might know. Do you know? It is near Old Street, but it's huge, isn't it? Thank you, Lynn. But so it's massive, and it's a picture of the winner, and I forget what she won, but this beautiful black lady, and it is probably the size of this whole floor space, and people in social have seen it and said to her, and it just has started this huge. There is a question for you here. I'm just again.
Just showing off about your work, aren't you?
So let me tell you about this client thing we did.
Carry on.
Really. Sorry. So my question is, fast forward to the question. My question is, with outdoors being such a canvas to drive pride and drive, representation, how do we do more of it? How do we get brands to use it as a canvas? Sorry.
I'm no doubt going to do this and potentially contradict myself here, but I think we talk a lot about location, about events, and those being synonymous with out of home. You've got a Pride event in Brighton. You might get brands that are synonymous with Pride want to do a campaign in Brighton. But I think what we're trying to do on that more broadcast level, which I think is where creative comes in, just to thread that what Satin was saying earlier, is actually work with all the stakeholders. Say, well, what is one-to-many medium like out of home brilliant at? And that is reaching a lot of people, and that is something that we should still celebrate to segue from celebrating months. But it is also because of, like you can see around the room, the influx of digital, but also the capabilities within the screens. And I think there's a disconnect with really utilising them to the max to perhaps do both, not one or the other. So if you are amplifying a message around Ramadan, for instance, like Tesco did so brilliantly recently and won an award around that, switching your creative on at the end of the day, at the end of the fast, before you have your family meal, and utilising the fact that can be done in digital out of home now, but at the same time, perhaps have a broadcast campaign that is ensuring that you're not just reaching those people, but you're reaching allies and you're celebrating that celebratory time, but having that continual thread of broadcast, perhaps brand-led creative, but considering the creative as well. A brand creative shouldn't look the same as a dynamic creative that's delivering at a specific moment across a specific group in a specific time and place. Both brilliant, but back to the points made earlier, bake it in up front. Don't do it at the end of the process because you think you might have missed a trick.
Like not that one special build of a Marmite thing exploding that everyone in media sees. And so is that what you mean?
That said, maybe that's the convergence piece where we thread it all together, take a picture and put it on social as well.
I said don't just do the mock-up, do one. Yeah.
Tesco are a good example because they have been talking to different communities for a long, long time. That Ramadan ad didn't just come out of nowhere. This is like a kind of ongoing conversation with all different communities actually. And it's back to the authenticity piece. Feels like they have permission to have that conversation. Pride, I think, is interesting because so many people just come down on, 1 weekend, 2 weekend. There is no media planner in the world that would ever suggest doing 1 weekend of activity to hit a target audience, So I don't know why for Pride, for LGBTQ, why is that okay? It's like, it's crazy, waste of time, waste of money.
No, agreed.
As much as anything.
I think one of the things, and Google love them, I hate them. They do a lot in our space of inclusivity and giving some of their media canvases to. They did it with the Black Pound Day. I know that wasn't their initiative that they created, but they gave some of their outdoor campaign to local businesses. Again, thinking, Gisela, about what you do, I'm wondering how much, like moving into what else needs to be done. What else needs to be done? But are there areas like that we can make a big difference in?
So I guess. Okay, when you're doing things, so one thing I find with community work as well is that most brands don't have the authority or the right really to speak to these communities in certain areas, like Black History Month, Ramadan, Diwali, a lot of these Pride, a lot of these spaces, because they're not doing the work already. So I think a lot of the time when we do put things forward, sometimes we're like, if you really, really want to speak to this community, consider partnerships, consider actually engaging with voices from the community and using them to kind of get your message across. But it's also a case of actually listening to the people you're working with. So if you're working with an influencer, you can't be super strict about how they produce their content because they know how they speak to their audience. I think I'm going to give an example. So I really like Bumble, some of the work that they do. They use quite a few influencers, and across the year, you'll see that they'll have a range of different influencers from different races, different backgrounds, different sexualities. And then that gives them the space to not necessarily directly talk, but they've got a podcast which they've brought out, like I think it came out today, called My Love Is, and that's kind of following a lot of people around Black love. But they have that space to talk about that because they have been doing the work, they have been talking to the community already. And I think sometimes people want to like just say, okay, I'm here, let me do it. And it's like, no, it doesn't work like that. But if you take time to actually try and get to know your audiences as well, like we're not a monolith, we might not actually be relevant to your brand, like, or it might be a section of the community. So it might be a section of the Black community that might be relevant to your brand. But if you try and target all of us, people are going to be like, wait, this doesn't feel right. So it's just that kind of, I don't even know if I'm answering your question correctly.
You are.
But
I don't know if I asked the right questions.
Yeah.
Either.
I
It's
just
fine,
think
we're all all right.
think you made a really good point there about creating content for different communities, and this is going back to your barriers for making changes. That brands have very strict guidelines about what is and isn't okay, and then you get into a situation where you want to speak in a different way with a different, vernacular. You have to be able to loosen those kind of really compartmentalized way of thinking about your brands, because that we have come up with that problem as well. It's like, well, our brand just wouldn't talk like that, but it's a different audience, so it's got to learn to talk in a different way sometimes, right? So I think that's just to butt in, because I think that's a really good point.
No, I think I think what you guys are doing brilliantly, better than I, is articulating really well exactly what the issues are and what some of the barriers are. And I think the bit that I sometimes wonder if is that nervousness that we've all talked about part of the barrier, because if you're H. Samuel or if you're XYZ, you've definitely got people from different cultures and colours coming into your shop buying your stuff. And actually, they're probably buying more of it than some of the customers you are targeting. So how do we help a H. Samuel, or how do we help client X to go and have more authentic conversation in that space? Is it content and partnerships, do you think, Gisela?
Okay, so from that point of view, I guess, even though I kind of said TGI doesn't cover everything, and like YouGov, they do, so, like
They
YouGov,
do some, yeah.
Yeah, they do some. So YouGov has got options there to look into ethnicity. It can look into some of sexuality as well, religion. It has those options in there, and you will find, even though the sample might not be like, you have your levels in terms of sample, so when you're going too low in sample size, but you will find that actually you can still pick out some insights. So you might be able to find that actually this community does buy more gold jewelry. That's a little bit that you can give to them to give them confidence that actually spending a little bit of media spend on that community might be worth it, because there clearly is a market for it. I think from that point of view, that's kind of a lot of stuff that we would do audits. We would say, okay, and we also see some of your competitors are doing better with this audience than you are. So it's just like a mixture of things.
It's a bit like media planning 101 in a way. What does the data tell us? Where are those? Because I guess if you're showing up with those messages and you're in the right locations, in the right titles, in the right placements, then I guess as a community just feeling like you're talking to them, it doesn't matter if they haven't changed their voice so much, maybe? Sorry, do you think they have to change the copy that they might run elsewhere in those communities? I guess it's so subjective based on what
it depends on the copy. So I guess if you have people in the copy, then clearly, obviously, the people hopefully should represent who is reading it. But if it's literally just like, oh, here's some rings. I don't think it needs to,
I've got a new client for you. We'll talk afterwards. Asa, tell us, what else do you think are the barriers in the world and the clients you're talking to, and helping your teams to be inclusive in how they're putting together their media plans?
I almost think it's just not knowing where to start. And so the solution that I spoke about previously, I think one of the reasons why we started off in a programmatic space is it allows you to be always on. You don't just need to think about, oh, here's a Pride coming up or Black History Month coming up. Like, if you start from, whenever, by the time certain events come up, at that point you can then be a lot more targeted and a lot more specific, because let's speak about Ramadan, for example. If I literally just saw that Ramadan campaign for a specific brand and I hadn't seen anything, in the previous year, then I would feel that would almost put me off more than,
Yeah.
more than engage. And so I think it's just making sure that we know as a starting point, let's just get something off the ground, and then that will naturally just build your own authenticity.
Yeah, I like that, and I think that's really because I definitely want to make sure we leave enough time for questions. But I think that answer is so brilliant in its simplicity. Is like make a start somewhere and build. I wonder, Steve, if you had to give the people in this room, like, we were talking about Black History Month wishes, and we're completely late for that. But I wonder what is the one bit of advice you would give, or what the thing that you would recommend if people want to make a step in the right direction.
I think we mentioned it already, but the conversation we've had even today, but the conversation we have with partners, whether it's media agencies, creative agencies, it's just think about it up front. What is the brief? Who are the audience, and how do we best represent them? And if we do that, to Satin's point earlier, with a lot going on, early doors with all stakeholders, and I think good work comes from that.
Brilliant, thank you. Gisela?
Sorry, I got this.
Tell us yours. Sorry, I'm like, if what was the easiest first step someone could make to make what would you tell your client, and what would you tell the people in the room about what's the first thing they could do to properly get going on this journey of inclusive planning, inclusive thinking?
I would say even like a test it, and it doesn't have, I think testing during a celebration is not a test because it's a celebration.
That's a tokening.
Yeah, so it's like you have a plan, and you might not want to put a load of budget behind it. But one thing as well we always get with the community channels is that sometimes, obviously, they don't necessarily measure in the same way, but you can ask them for things that you might not be able to ask a traditional media owner. Like, I've had campaigns where I'll be like, have you got any caller feedback, where they've heard the radio ad? And I think there was one we did for government for UK transition. So this is when we were still deep in Brexit. And yeah, I know.
Don't end on a sour note.
I'm sorry. But it was like actual like hairdressers calling up the radio station being like, I did not know this, and there is product I need to import. Thank you, that kind of vibe. So it's like there are ways to get feedback and get things to understand. Actually, people are enjoying this content. They are engaging with the ads that you're producing. So it's just kind of like, just test it. Even if you're really scared, if you put a small amount of your budget to just try, that's like the first step. It's a small step, but it's the first step.
Yeah. Like it's similar to Hazard, you could just go out and do something. Also reminds us how rubbish the Remain campaign was, unfortunately. Satin, lastly, from you, what's, I guess...
I mean, listen, we all want to speed up this process, right? We want to make...
Tonight?
Tonight? Well, hopefully we have a bit tonight. Speed up... sorry, I've got to go. Speed up this process of building comms, and media that is just much more engaging, much more relevant and connecting. And I think we just sort of need to shock people, our clients, people who hold the purse strings of those budgets, and sort of shock them by creating some jeopardy around... It's more like, if you don't do this, what is the impact? That's the way that you've got to think about it, because it's sort of too easy just to carry on business as usual, muddling along, doing what you've been doing. So I think we have to create some jeopardy in it. If you don't, this, you're missing out on big audiences. You're not doing the right thing for your brand. You'll go, whatever it might be, the moral angle, whatever's going to make them sit up and take note, because you just need to kickstart some stuff.
Yeah, and weirdly, and what I like about that is that the jeopardy probably is if you can't, what we're hearing from everyone here, you can't just start at an event or a festival or a thing, you have to be doing it. So if people start voting with their feet, you're already too late if you haven't started. So I think you're right, it's that jeopardy and how we show some of that. So we're going to ask some questions, but first, shall we just say well done to our brilliant panellists? Thank you, team. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? These guys, not me.
Yogi from Media Lab. We had one of the representatives from advertising at our offices a couple of weeks ago, and he had a really fascinating insight. He was talking about getting adverts on like Gay Times, and obviously that's the LGBT community, but he made a comment which was a lot of planners fail to explain to their brands that just because it's niche doesn't mean that there's a minority market there. It is actually quite mainstream. It's a big audience. how do you, I mean, because obviously the title of the event as well is minority to mainstream. How do you convince brands that just because they're a minority doesn't mean when you look out at a sea of people that they are very often the majority, you know? Because they do see them as a small percentage, but they're a huge audience.
It's a great question for a start. I think who wants to have a go at?
I'm having a quick go. So, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a bit of research that we did on this, trying to understand it from a clear channel audience point of view. So, it's remiss for us to go into market not understanding what our portfolio looks like when it comes to striking the balance with those audiences across the country. And what we found was when we were talking about the broadcast element, it's quite difficult. So, what are the data points to say that it, to your point, is a broadcast audience, not a minority audience? And one of the main things that we've been looking at as part of that, but the new element of it's coming out, is census data. And for the first time, to your point around LGBTQ plus communities, it's the first census that will ever capture those people, which is crazy. And it's probably one of the last, 2 or 3 census that will capture ethnic communities. So for us, it's going to be key to, well, actually, what is the reach percentage within the Clear Channel portfolio for those minority audiences? Because they're, of course, not minorities. The second part of that was trying to find out although it's not necessarily the representative piece or is easy to talk about, but ultimately these brands are trying to make sure that they make money and sell their products. And mentioned it earlier, but 300 billion and growing. Spend capacity for a minority audience. That's not a minority amount of cash to go after, is it? If we're going after, talking about brands. So I think there's some things there, but it's how we debunk them for our different areas of specialism. That's purely thinking from an out-of-home point of view. I'm sure there's more on the breadth of the panel.
I think we've got to reframe in people's mind what mainstream is, right? And I think if you look at certain, certainly age demographics. Don't quote me on this, but there was something like 40 or 50% identify as LGBTQ of a young demographic, right? It's 40, well, maybe a bit more. So you also can't look at the population in the same way as we used to. You break down by different groups, and those things are mainstream. They're much more mainstream. So I just think we just got to rethink that mainstream language, because clients say it, people say it all the time. Well, we're just reaching everybody, Okay, so then why is your ad got a white person? You're not. So
I guess everybody is, especially in unfortunate months ahead, everybody is probably not who you want to talk to, right? If you've got a limited budget and you've got to drive sales, probably want to go to those audiences who are more likely to buy and purchase, and money talks a bit, right? So maybe you're right, how often do we get everybody? Maybe, again, going back to the agency's role as being the guardian of that conversation, we probably need to go, actually, you need to be a bit more focused in the audiences you go in. And to your point, that moving from that minority to, maybe it's not minority mainstream, maybe it's like minority to something alliterative. That's what we do in media, don't we? Something that demonstrates, again, what you were saying, Gisela, that they're a group that spend a lot of cash. Does anyone want to build on that, or shall we?
I think I just want to kind of open the discussion on the old Sainsbury's campaign that ran a couple of years ago at Christmas. I don't know if you remember it, but Black Family, Gravy Boat. And I just kind of wanted, from your perspectives as, dealing with those clients. First of all, do you think Sainsbury's, they went too far? Because I'm not sure, we don't have anyone from Sainsbury's here, but it seemed like a big step for them. When I remember seeing the ad and just going, this is incredible. But, and then you had, of course, all the, the haters who kind of was on Twitter and then luckily all the competitors stood up and said, actually, we don't want you guys coming to our shop anyway. So it ended well, but I just kind of, what's your view on that? Was that a moment which said actually inclusive planning has landed, or there's no right or wrong? I just want to, because for me it was a big thing for me.
It's a good question. I've got a good answer, but who wants to start? I've got to wait till pass the watershed first before I start swearing.
I guess I can start. I do remember the ad, and I think just to kind of also just talk on the ad, it felt like a lot of research went into the production of that ad. They took time to figure out what the authentic because like I said, we're not all a monolith, but what an authentic Black Christmas could be like for a family in the UK. And I think that in itself is a great thing. And then I think there's the other element of it where naturally we do also have, as human beings, negative bias, where we focus on the bad things people say when they come out, which is what clients do. Like, you might have an amazing amazing campaign, and then someone says one bad thing, and they're like, "Shit, I'm sorry." They're like,
right.
"Sorry."
Warm them up. I'm gonna get going.
Yeah. But it's that kind of element where sometimes, like, you need someone to take these risks, and the more risks people take, the quieter those voices will become, because it starts to become more of a norm. So I think that's kind of my view on that, and it's great that people stood up behind it, because sometimes you get clients do some amazing work and then like they get one bad comment and they backtrack, and it's like, no, don't backtrack. You were right. Like, you were right in the first place. And it's like, you can't please, the other thing is you can't please everyone. But those people will always be, touch wood, the minority in their negative thinking. So that's kind of where like my brain is around that Sainsbury's campaign.
That's such a good answer, and I think that I think the interesting thing is Sainsbury's were probably, I won't say they were first to go out there and do it, but I think they were amongst. I mean, fucking hell, like, go out and do what? Show a black person enjoy Christmas. I'm like, really, really fucks me off. And he knows that, by the way, triggering. But they were among the first for whether we think that's the right language or not. And so I think, I hope they weren't brave. I hope they were trying to portray what a Christmas could look like for many of us up and down the country, right? And I guess the interesting thing is there aren't enough other representation what Christmas festive period might look like up and down the country. And I think for that, we should question that more. I think that the best, one of the best answers or the best things I read about it was, sorry if a black family dancing and enjoy Christmas offends you. And it's like, what the, and this is, you have got me going. He's just sitting there laughing. But then also, this is why Twitter is the worst place in the world and getting worse, right? And I came off of all socials for about 3 years, and I was missing out on good food stuff, which was annoying me. So I'm back on it, and I'm not going to be off it again. Like, it's the worst place in the world to be, because it is, just to your point, a negative echo chamber, and then negative bias is nowhere better to be seen than on Twitter. I think, was it John Lewis Home Insurance did the was it Crazy Dance? I don't know what the theme, I want to say it was Elton John, and it was a trans kid smashing up the room, and they'd done the same advert 3 years ago, might be the wrong period, and that showed just a normal child smashing up the room to this theme tune. And again, they pulled that very quickly, because I think the intonation was that this trans kid smashing up the room was a negative thing about that trans community. I don't know. I'm not smart enough in that space to know whether that's right or wrong, right? So I'm not trying to offend anyone. But again, I think they were just trying to show that kid could be a normal kid. It being a normal kid, smashing up the room, never get a slap from me. But do you know what I mean? So again, I think you're right about the bravery and the thing. But I'm hoping we just see more authentic visualisation of what times are like for more people. And that means we see different people in different colours, races, sexes on telly, on posters, whatever. Someone makes that sound more articulate than me. Does anyone want to build on any of that?
Yeah,
Thanks,
I'd add to it. I think, so when I first saw the advert, I genuinely didn't think anything of it. And so the fact that other people then took away from that like something negative, like it really just confused me more than anything. And so I think not the ad itself, but the result of the ad, I think, was naturally a good thing for us as an industry, because it kind of gives the green light, if we needed it, that this is normal, that we can represent ourselves and be inclusive. And I think, yeah, the fact that supermarkets came together as well, like that as a first, like that was a statement. And I think as an industry, I think we probably, as negative as the initial thing was, we kind of needed a moment like that, I think.
You're right, and say we're not going to take it anymore. I think maybe don't go and look at it, but the Telegraph wrote an article after the John Lewis, the space alien kid. Do you know the kid that, I forget what the story was called, but whoever wrote that article shouldn't have a job at the Telegraph. It was horrendous. It was like, why would this person be from that background? Why would that? And I'm like, the mainstream media, I don't call the Telegraph mainstream, but unfortunately it is to a lot of people, are writing these really negative articles about communities that are just holding back the conversation. So again, it's a good question to ask, Noreen, because you know you'll get a good response. But I do think we just all we've got a responsibility to push back, to say no, to come together to do all those things. Has anyone got any more? Hello there. Where's the mic gone? Yeah, Noreen, you pass it around.
Just a quick one. It kind of leads on from Noreen's question, but how long do you think we need to celebrate brands for being inclusive and having that advertising? Because my thing was the Halifax advert that came out, I think earlier this year or last year, where it's like he's walking through to a song. I can't remember the song off the top of my head. But he's walking through this like multitude of different families on a normal street. It's a normal street we see every single day. While I'm happy that there is representation, why am I celebrating something I've seen for the last 30 years of my life? So how long do we have to celebrate brands?
Good question. Just for doing what the job is. Yes. Who wants to answer that one?
I mean, yes, it's. I think there's a difference between celebrating but encouraging people to still do it. Right? I agree with you. We shouldn't be celebrating it. We shouldn't be excited about seeing things that. I think that's a really good point. Things that we see every day. We all see every day, unless you live in, under a rock somewhere. But I think we still have to we have to still push and encourage and get people excited about doing it, because they're not. So I think if the outcome is we see better representation, I'm quite willing to blow as much smoke up people's asses as they like. Do you know what I mean? Because we just need to get some stuff so it does feel so normal that people aren't scared of doing it anymore. And it was interesting what you were talking about, that ad. That ad was a black family, and I remember at that time there was a lot of advertisers going, must have better representation, and there were loads of them hedging their bets that have a black, a couple, a black, a black girlfriend, a white boyfriend. It's like, we don't want to go completely black, or, and it was like, this is an amazing. It was and I like the fact that you said it was authentic. It felt like that to me. It was a black family. I think they had other bits of copy, but I think they doubled down on that as well. I think after the backlash, they started showing it. Well, that might have been urban myth. I don't know. But yeah.
I think the encouraging bit is interesting, and I really like the question, because I think we live in our own filter bubble, especially in London, where we're used to living in quite a multicultural, a multi space, right? Where maybe not in all parts of London, but in a lot of London. And I think as soon as you get out there a bit, and I'm not saying you don't, by the way, but I know people in my friendship group who are from places in the country where there really isn't that diversity of. So again, I think that's where media could be a force for good, because media can talk to some of these groups, and not that things should need normalising, but portray what true multicultural Britain should look like. So again, should they be celebrated for just showing an inclusive audience? No, that's their job. But I guess the encouraging bit is a really good way of thinking about it, I think. Then we've probably got time for one, especially if I don't answer it, we've probably got time for two more questions. So, Naren, will you be the microphone guy? Go on. Thank you.
Thank you. So I work at Wavemaker on Nationwide, and we do quite a bit. We've been working really hard in this space for a couple of years and on inclusive planning. But the hardest bit for us, and the client really believes in it and backs it, and we've done a lot of stuff, but is cold, hard business results that show that it and it makes complete sense that obviously you widen your audience, you get growth audiences. To your point, we talk about growth audiences quite a lot, audiences that we maybe don't speak to enough, that we can grow with. But so it makes sense, the rationale is all there, but we struggle to then prove people joining Nationwide, the society, from different backgrounds as a result of what we've been doing. And obviously because it's protected characteristics, there's no reason why Nationwide would ask you, your sexuality when you join, as they shouldn't, that's not relevant. But we tried to write an IPA paper a few months ago on this, because we've been doing it for a couple of years, and we've got really strong brand health results from doing it with different communities. Like, they see the brand in a more positive light, they recommend the brand more likely, but all this kind of stuff. But we've even asked the client, can you help us, because we can't collect that kind of data to kind of say, actually, we've got more people from different communities joining Nationwide and taking out products as a result. And it's kind of the Achilles heel of it, because we all believe it's the right thing to do, and we know it's the right thing to do, and it makes complete sense that it helps you grow. But we want to be able to prove it in hard business numbers, so that more clients will do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, it might be easier for other sectors. I don't know. But again, because the data you need to collect on people, on customers, is protected characteristics. So I don't know. It's a bit of a hard question. But if anyone's got any other clients where you've managed to be able, to actually put a kind of business result on that, then I'd be really interested to hear it.
It's a good question. Has anyone faced anything?
That's a really hard question.
It's an eternal thing for out of home. We'll think about econometrics and whatnot, but I won't get into that today. But I guess we hear a lot from, do things work? And I guess looking back at who spends with this for us with inclusivity, to your point, banking, where people are on the ads, and retail. The other that's an extension of the category is grocery. And we mentioned Tesco, but Lidl recently as well, campaign around Diwali. And I guess it's the products that are being sold perhaps can in turn engineer whether there's a business result. So it's hard to say that a product, which is a banking product, has been bought by a different ethnic group, whereas a meal advertised around a certain event can be tracked through. So I think that's, from the conversations we've had, perhaps that's why it makes it difficult for that category, thinking about the categories that spend and represent.
Do you find, that's a good answer, Steve, do you find that a brand study that looks at those audience groups is still too fluffy to link it to hard business? For an IPA paper, I guess it is,
for an IPA paper, yes. We've won other awards because you don't have to prove the kind of, we can't model it with econometrics, for example. And actually the feedback from the IPA was it nearly got through, but it doesn't have the same weight of evidence that we look for judging papers, which makes complete sense, but it's almost impossible for us to do that.
Yeah.
So we tried to play that challenge up in the paper as there's a paucity of data here, but we all know it's the right thing to do, and we know we're resonating better with audiences. They're claiming they now prefer the brand, all this kind of stuff, but does it translate to them then choosing the brand in the moment of purchase?
Yeah.
And that's just really hard to quantify.
I have a thought on what you're saying. So I feel like there's really, really low Southeast Asian representation still. But my daughter does not feel that way. So my daughter is 14 in December. Race doesn't feel like it's an issue for her. We have this conversation a lot. She lives in a different world to the world that I grew up in and the world that I still exist in. And it's like, I think that if brands are being super inclusive now, they will reap the benefits, for the next generation. Because it is, I know we don't want to get deep, but knowing that her life is so much better than mine was, it's wonderful. So the brands need to keep going.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't see that. Yeah. And it's amazing. I'm sorry, Liam. You said
No, please don't be sorry. I think it's such an important point that this is for today, but it's for tomorrow. And that sounds like a catchphrase. I don't mean it to be, but our children, if you have them, are being brought up in a world that is in places more tolerant, is more, it's easier to see who they are and people. And that's, I guess it brings you back a little bit to the Rishi comment, right? But someone can look up and go, it's not a white bloke or a white lady in Parliament, and that's a brilliant thing. So I totally get it. It won't help you with your IPA effectiveness award. I'll stick that in. But look, it's emotional and it's heartfelt. I don't mean let's not take it deep, because let's take it deep if we need to. So thank you for sharing that, and it is amazing that that we are bringing up, hopefully, kids that live in a better society. Last question. I was going to say, Lynn, that's a researcher's question as well. So grab Lynn at the end and she can help you answer that, I think. Any other questions from anybody else? I think that's it then. The wonderful people at Clear Channel put on some drinks upstairs and some nibbles, I believe, if you'd care to join us for a little bit afterwards to carry on a conversation and have a chat. I guess I wanted to say thank you to the team again. So it's brilliant. I think we all learn stuff from these sorts of conversations, and that's why I love doing them, because I definitely do. So thank you so much for giving up your time. You're right.
Thank you to you. Great hosting, as always.